Hi folks, I'm Mike Medea, the head of education programs at the American Philosophical Society. If you haven't joined us for our career chats before, that's okay. If you have, thanks for being part of our community, especially considering this is the first one. If you need a quick introduction to the APS though, be sure to check out our website or follow us on social media. We're on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. So we're here to discuss the many careers offered by an organization like the APS. As a museum, research library, archive, and membership society, we have great staff who do work ranging from administration to publications. Career Chats showcases these staff members and introduces you to careers you might not have considered before. I asked these staff members a series of questions during this interview, and if you've seen the page for this series and have a question about a certain career, be sure to submit that. We record the conversations on Tuesdays and launch them on Thursdays, and we'd love to hear from you. Today on Career Chats, I'm here with Estelle, the assistant head of cataloging. How are you doing today?
Hello.
So we'll launch into a series of questions. We have about 15 questions we'll cover, and we'll just kick things off. So Estelle, could you repeat your name, title, and tell us a little bit more about you?
Sorry, you got digitally scrambled.
Oh no, the joys of technology.
Yeah.
So the first question is just a repeat of your name and title, and could you tell us a little bit more about you?
Okay, sure. I have a BA from the Penn State University and a library degree from Drexel University. And I live in Philadelphia. I moved here after college, so I've been here about 20 years.
That's great. So as a Temple owl, you know, like you said, the two worst colleges to be possible, but that's okay. We can all work together and be fine throughout all of this. So assistant head of cataloging, what do you do?
So it's pretty varied day to day, which is not typical for a cataloger. The APS, and I think you're going to find this a lot in these job chats, is really specific because we are a pretty small academic research library. And so I think it's an opportunity. I get the chance as a cataloger to do public service. I have shifts in our reading room, on the reference desk, and on the paging desk. And I'm also able to go to a lot of the social hours that we have and the scholarly programs that we have. But my essential job is to catalog books and other printed materials. So if anything has ever been printed, like a printed out email or a basic book or a photograph, a map, anything, even a globe, my job is to create essentially what is a virtual copy of it, noting the authors, the publishers, the year it was put out, and specifically for rare materials, and specifically for the APS, which is what most libraries do not do, we catalog all provenance information. Provenance information means any kind of information that I can find about who owned it, who used it, who wrote in it, who sold it, who bound the book, who made the paper, who made the typesetting. If I can find out all that sort of stuff, I make sure to put it down. Now, not necessarily for a book printed in 2020, but definitely if we have a book printed by Benjamin Franklin and I knew exactly who the paper maker is, then I can bring that out in what's called an added entry, and it's basically a hyperlink to everything that person has done within our catalog.
Cool. That sounds like detailed work. So how do you explain your career to your parents or friends?
Yeah, it's a little difficult because it sounds incredibly boring at first. It's essentially entering information into a really big Excel spreadsheet that other people are going to use, which doesn't sound exciting at all. But what I really like about it is that I get to look at so many different things in any given day. So I actually don't have to focus on one of anything, and I don't have to be an expert in anything. I just have to know where to get that information. So at the APS, for example, we have, I think, one of the very first textbook on chemistry printed in Yiddish in the in the oh, what is that new library? The David Center
Right.
has it. It's written by Saul Feinstone. It's a great piece. I don't have to be a chemist in order to catalog it. I don't have to be fluent in Yiddish in order to catalog it, but I was able to find out what it was and what was really special about it, and also that it was owned by the person who published it or who wrote it.
Okay.
That's another pretty cool thing. So I get to look at that. I get to look at 15th century maps. I get to look at moon landing photographs. I get to, it's just, as you know, and as these talks will prove, is the APS has such a weird collection of things from all over that it's detailed oriented, but it changes every day enough that it doesn't get boring.
Right, and I think that's a huge part of it. Like whenever you talk to somebody in these kind of nonprofit spheres, especially museums and archives, you find that we rarely describe the job that we do, but we'll talk about the things that we get to work with or the people that we get to work with. And like, I love that example. So do you tend to work solo or as a team?
Yeah, so there's only two of me, two of us. Now there's only two of us in the department, but we talk to each other a lot. Her office is right next door to me. And also I have a wide array of listservs that I can consult. Yet another exciting aspect to library life is all of these different listservs with eager people to help you find out new subject headings, the best way to describe something. And really, at the APS, we are very, very lucky because I get to work right next to the conservation lab. And the people who work in the conservation lab know so much more about book history and paper history that they can tell me automatically. And I'm not even kidding. Renee once told me, I held up a book for her and she said, oh, that's from the German, it's a German printed book, German bound book because it's pigskin and it's definitely from the 18th century. And she just looked at it. It was absolutely unbelievable.
Like, right, just by pure sight.
So, yeah.
It's amazing. Yeah, I do love that too because I think that museums, archives, libraries are such a highly networked field that it's rare, even if you're working on your own, you'll find ways to quickly like talk to other people in the field about what's going on, how to do your work, and things. So that's a great point to bring up.
And people in the glam world are really eager to help. I think that's one thing I had to get used to is that I came from more of like a restaurant industry background where people are very secretive about what they do and they're really not willing to share. Oh God, anyway, yeah, maybe they are, I don't know, but not to the same way that libraries are, and museums, I think, are just really excited about everybody else's work as well as our own.
Right, it's just so fun to have those conversations. So how long have you been with the APS?
I've been at the APS. APS is my first library job, and I've been here in some form or another since August of 2008. I started as a volunteer.
Cool, nice. Which is so nice to hear that like people have these long careers at the APS. I think it's like a rare thing within many fields anyway, so it's cool to know. And you hinted at it, so you worked in the restaurant field before working at the APS, but do you want to talk about that a little bit more?
Oh, sure. So I graduated from college in 2000, and it was yet another economic downturn. And I had a philosophy degree, and I always thought I would go to law school, and I never bothered to. It seemed terrible and boring, and I didn't know what I wanted to do. But Philadelphia 20 years ago was very cheap. And I was able to live pretty reasonably by working as a video clerk and a bunch of sort of odd jobs around Philly. And that lasted for a few years. Finally got a job as an office manager, mostly because I knew how to do Office, Word, Excel, that sort of thing, in a small growing pizza chain. And so I helped them with their labor stuff and their payment stuff and paying state taxes and that sort of thing. So it was almost like what I do today. It was a lot of Excel spreadsheets.
That'll come up again and again.
My life.
I love Excel. Which
Yeah.
I love, and I hope this comes out more in these conversations too, is that like even if you leave undergrad or college just knowing how to function with Excel or do this office-based work, that is such a transferable skill that like that in and of itself is valuable. It's ridiculous. So how did you go from working in the restaurant field to then learning about or first hearing about this field of work that you do?
Well, it was, so 2008 was yet another economic downturn. And I could see, despite the fact that my bosses told me that pizza was recession proof, I thought that maybe I should go and get something that was more meaningful to me. And that really meant that I knew I needed to be around people that wanted to always learn and never stopped being curious. And it's not to say that people in the restaurant industry aren't curious or aren't learning. It's just another way that I wanted to live my life. Also, I really wanted to be a 9-to-5 person with a weekend, which is interesting because libraries don't tend to work on that. No. I wasn't fairly. I also really thought it was a great stable job because I was going to get a master's in history. And then I thought to myself, what the heck am I going to do with that? I didn't go on any informational interviews. I didn't ask anyone who actually had this sort of job. I didn't really know what I was doing for such a long time, even after I started at library school, and the only reason I chose Drexel was because I didn't want to move. I thought about the University of Hawaii. They also have a library program, but at the time I had cats and I didn't want to quarantine my cat. These are not, I don't.
No, I love that.
Decisions.
I think that's so important though, is that like, I don't want anybody to leave this whole series of conversations thinking that everybody needs such a clear-cut path. And sometimes we find ourselves like the type of curiosity that we're surrounded by might not be the type of curiosity that we identify with, or it might not be the kind of work schedule that we want. And sometimes finding a career that just fits that is okay. It's about living your life too. Like we want that work-life balance. I think what you talked about is really covers a lot. It covers a whole lot of that.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
and once I got into library school, I realized that I was the only one without any library experience. Everyone there had been a library, nerd in high school or had a work study job in college. And I hadn't had any of that experience. I had only ever worked, I worked at a fish market in high school. Like I had these kind of like weird teenager jobs where like, sure, I'll work at a movie theater, blowing up popcorn. Why not? It's fine. But actually, all those jobs gave me a kind of edge to work in the reading room because I do have the ability to talk to people and to make them feel welcome. And being in the reading room, they call it public service, but I really do consider it the front of the house of the library, and when I catalog, I'm in the back of the house, where I'm like, making the pizza, if you will, versus serving it. Never serve pizza in a reading room.
Ideally, no.
No. But those skills that people gain from those first jobs, I think are also really transferable, and they're not something to be sneezed at.
No, God, no. My first job was at a grocery store, and I constantly talk about that. And, like whenever I'm training staff or things like that, like you learn as you go, and everything is transferable in so many ways. So a lot of that does kind of transfer over to the next question of what are the, I guess I'll rephrase it as, what are the typical education experience expectations for this job?
So they are changing. It's pretty wild. The job itself is changing because you have to be much more technically an expert than I am. It's strange to be almost half a dinosaur, even though I've only worked for 10 years. There's been so much advancement in library technical services, which is what it's usually called. There's different ways that this department is called. Sometimes it's called discovery and access. Sometimes it's called technical services. And one of the aspects that's difficult with the APS is that it's not really comparable to a lot of other institutions. So where if I had this job for, let's say, University of Pennsylvania, I would have to have what's called a subject master's, which is on top of my library master's. I would have to have a master's either in history or in some language, just to give me what's called subject expertise, so that I could better catalog those books, because they're not able to put in the time to train someone the way that Marion has trained me for these last 10 years to be able to catalog the records that we have now. So much, everybody has their first day on the job, basically. And at Penn or another university like that, you need so much more to get to that first job, to get to that first day, than you do, I think, at a smaller institution, because we're just willing to put in the work into our people.
Yeah, it's the APS is a weird place. Is a weirdly good place like that, I think, too.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, what would you say are the pros and cons of your job?
The pros are that I never stop. It never stops getting interesting for me. There's rarely a day where I don't learn something. You know, sometimes it's like a little bit of American history. Sometimes it's, I don't know, it's even, I was at the reference desk one day, and Patrick Spiro, who's like, you know, a real scholar, comes up to me and says, "Hey, can you translate this French letter for me? I need to know whether these guys were staying at this hotel or not that hotel." And I'm like, "What is happening here?" And like, "Oh yeah, it's this like huge thing, and John Adams is mad at them." And it was such a fun afternoon, you know, of diving down into September of whatever it was, 73 or something, and like John Adams and his peccadillos, and, you know, like, "Oh, you owe me money." No, you know, it is, that's the best part of the job, is stuff like that, honestly. But I think the worst parts of the job, the cons, would be that sometimes I feel like a real fish out of water, because so many of the people that I work with, and I don't even come from that much of a working class background. I just sort of put myself in one when I was in college and in high school, when a lot of the people that we work with don't have a lot of experience with people of different races or genders, ethnic identities, you know, class identities. And so sometimes things are said or assumed that are, I don't know, take me aback a little bit. But there's definitely a change in contingent within the staff, I think. So I don't know that it will always be there.
Yeah. So first, fully agree with the pros. I think like the pros are always these kind of story bound things that we have in this field of like the stuff that we deal with is so bizarre. The people that we get to deal with are so great and so smart and passionate about what they do that like we can't leave a single day or a week without a different story about who and what we work with.
Yeah.
Right, but that's also that can be the con. Research libraries, museums, archives are part of that kind of historic ivory tower of career sets where that kind of diversity hasn't always been included. It's changing now, I would say, but it is part of the reality, at least for the next 15, 20 years, that set of diversity and inclusion hasn't been fully incorporated yet into institutions like the APS, but we're working on it. But it's a real reality, so thank you for bringing that up. Where is the next question? So the next set of questions are kind of more about your background story. You to kind of get us thinking about what we were all like in high school or undergrad. So what would you say you were like in high school?
What was I like in high school? I was somebody who, I moved around a lot as a kid. And through high school, I moved to the area when I was midway through high school, and it was kind of a rough change because I had been at a very large rural high school in North Carolina. My old high school had about 5,000 students, and they were everything from university professor kids to tobacco farmer kids. And so it was a real large swath of society. And then my parents moved to the suburbs of Philadelphia, and I attended Lower Merion High School, which was pretty rough because it was sort of like a handful of different people that you could be there, and I didn't really fit in that well. But I still liked school, and I did outside school activities, drama club and that sort of thing, which gave me a good set of friends. And I was mostly afraid of not having fun as a teenager, as an adult ever again, because a lot of the adults in my life are academics or more academics or lawyers or doctors. And they're very serious and they're very nice, and they put a lot of time and energy into making me a very smart person. And it was very boring, and it just seemed terrible. And I was terrified of that happening to me and of just being a horrible, boring person. And I didn't understand how adults made friends. I do remember that for a really long time. Yeah.
I love that, because I think, and I hope like another kind of thing that comes out of these conversations is that few things change about the kind of dynamics of high school in so many ways, where we all have the same fears going through of like, I remember not knowing, like, how do you be an adult? What is an adult? How do you even get to that point? Like, I can't think 5 years ahead, so I can't even imagine like 10, 20 years beyond that. Like, I agree, like, right, and knowing who you're at high school with, it's hard to sometimes fit in and find your kind of spot within that. But like, you do find these things that get you through. So being surrounded by academics and doctors and lawyers, is this what you thought you'd be doing when you were in high school?
Wait, what was that? You got garbled. I'm so sorry.
We're having like full internet issues today. So being surrounded by all those academics, doctors, and lawyers, is what you're doing now what you thought you would be doing when you were in high school?
Oh, no. I thought I was going to be a lawyer. I really did. Everybody thought I was going to be a lawyer. That was my trajectory. I got the LSAT book. Is that dating me? That probably dates me. They probably don't have those study books anymore.
I still have study books for that, yeah.
I learned that when my kid gets his report card next year, it's going to be through email. I don't even... Everything is... I'm a very old person, apparently, but yeah, I still have the LSAT preparedness book. Even in 2008, when I was looking around for something more interesting to do, I thought about law school again, and I went on one informational interview to a big law firm in Philadelphia that is the law firm for Marlboro, and I just I was like, I can't do this. Not that there's anything wrong with that, I guess. So yeah, I thought I was going to be a lawyer. And to this day, when my parents talk about what I do, they say, yeah, she's still just a librarian, which is fun. It's fine.
Parents will like sometimes rarely understand what we do. It's hard to explain, especially in like a field that's non-traditional in a sense like ours. So it's always more difficult.
Yeah, I don't do story time. And I think that's what my friends and family think is like, how is Estelle doing story time for toddlers? Is like, has there ever been a toddler inside of APS other than my own personal child? I don't,
we get plenty of toddlers visit, yeah. That's more of like what I do.
Yeah.
So like the kind of next transition in life, what were you like in undergrad?
Pretty much the same. I started off at Smith College, which is very fancy, and I did well there. I just didn't do well socially at all, and I had to transfer to. I really felt that I needed a really large institution that I hated, because I like to go up against things instead of go with the flow, and Smith felt too nice it didn't feel real. And so I needed to get out of there and go somewhere where I had something to fight against, which was Penn State, with a very large institution full of people that most of whom I don't want to have anything to do with. I don't know why that is a part of my personality, but it is. I didn't take college very seriously. I did, in fact, that I only took the classes that interested me, but that was only art history and earth sciences and philosophy. I didn't take anything that could have possibly transferred into any kind of, I guess, earth science. I could have been an earth scientist. That would have been helpful right now. But then I would have still had to get like some horrible PhD, and I don't want to do that either. So yeah, I never thought about the future. Even my senior year of college, people asked me what that year, everybody is always asking you, what are you gonna do when you finally graduate? And I would always say, I don't know, I'll just get a job. Like everybody else, I'll just get a stupid job, I'll put on a stupid suit, just like you, and I'll get on with my life, then die. It was just, I wasn't looking forward to it.
Okay, so the positive things that came out of that, and I think there are a couple of things, good things within that, right? Of like, there is a mindset that undergrad has to determine your next move very clearly. Like you said, you were a philosophy major. You had no intentions of pursuing philosophy, and that's okay. But you found interest in it, which helped you get through undergrad. Like in a lot of ways, if by finding what's meaningful in those environments, that's how we get through that. And the pros and cons of like large universities and smaller colleges, where like that's part of the reason why I went to Temple. I needed to be in a large space. I came from a small high school. I needed that larger like breathing room of like, I'm not just like this other person like on this campus. There are so many other people here that have radically different perspectives than me, and like large universities really do offer that in so many ways. So the same kind of question of, is this what you thought you would, is your career now what you thought you'd be doing in undergrad? Which doesn't sound like it.
No, again, I really thought I was going to be a lawyer. I really, really thought I was going to be a lawyer. Which, I know lovely lawyers. I'm related to some even. I don't know. Never really took that plunge.
I'm finding what's right for you.
You know what? Catch me in 10 years. Maybe I'll be a lawyer.
Okay. We'll circle back around to this.
Yeah.
So with all those kinds of happenings and those kind of life changes and periods in your life, what was your aha moment with this career trajectory?
It was after I had an informational interview with Marion, my current boss. And she was showing me around the library. And I really hope you do a career chat with Marion, although maybe it won't work out, but she's fantastic. And she's been at the APS for 40 years. It's also her first library job. And she was really describing it appropriately, where it's a serious job, it's very detail oriented, but there's also a lot of fun in that detail. And I don't know, there was some aspect of like the freedom of being able to go up to the stacks to the uncatalogued material and looking at a bunch of weird things that nobody has gotten into yet, and being the person that gets to describe those items. And then halfway into, I was assigned a grant to catalog the James Ballantyne Darwin collection. So for 3 years, I did nothing but catalog Darwin books, all books on evolution. And it got a little bit tedious towards the end, but really it was really fun to sort of discover something that I had never thought about Charles Darwin. Of course, everybody knows Charles Darwin, but like I had never really discussed it with big time scholars or gotten to be intimately sort of appreciative of the publishing history of his books and the breadth of what he had written about and how it had affected not only medicine, but also social movements and how people proved their worth having a Darwin book on their shelves and what it means to people. So there was definitely this point where I don't know, I settled into it and I didn't mind it anymore. And it was fun in a way that I didn't expect it to be, and it's sort of it's sort of like a kind of a aha moment where, like, you know, I'm not a pop star. It wasn't like, and then there was this article written about me and it was fantastic. And no, it was just, I realized that I was happy where I was.
I love that though, because it's not like, it's not your friend's aha moment for you. It's your own aha moment. Like, you are the one that has to settle into that career, like you said, and you have to find that meaning in that. So that's right. That's the whole point.
Yeah.
So you've mentioned informational interviews a couple of times, and that's something that I think across our fields, we really say, like, really encourage like students and people who are curious about our jobs to reach out to us and ask us information about our careers, how we do our work and things. So multi-part question that I'll try to break up. What question from informational interviews do you love being asked about your job?
I do remember this from your questionnaire. It's a hard one to answer. There's been a few people you've sent my way who've been so put together that they asked me questions that I wasn't prepared for. They were just so, I think, because the next generation is sort of born digital themselves, they ask questions that are really intuitive as far as like how systems work, because that's essentially what I work with, right? Is relational databases, and sort of like how information moves around. And so for someone who's grown up sort of with a rudimentary understanding, not necessarily of a relational database, but they understand sort of the intuitive aspect of what I do, that just any weird question that, or it doesn't have to be weird, just I just like, it's like I'm in one culture, right, library culture, and somebody outside of library culture will ask me questions sometimes that I haven't thought about since 2008 when I was starting this, you know. It's a bad answer to your question because I can't really come up with it because I haven't been asked that question yet.
I like that though, because like, right, like sometimes we might look up like questions asked in an interview and they don't really match, or they don't feel right for the person asking the question, or the kind of end point, or the person being interviewed. So you know, sometimes you have to come up with the questions on your own, and I think that's okay.
Yeah, I think honesty is always the best policy, right?
Mm-hmm.
And really putting yourself out there and say, like, if somebody came up to me and said, I really like working outside, well, this is a terrible job for that person, right?
Right.
If they can't do it, it's that they'll be miserable doing it. So
you're going to look at the outdoors and
you know, that sort of thing, I guess.
Yeah.
Well, that's the big thing. I have a huge window, which is not common for catalogers. Usually work in the basement. Just FYI to future catalogers out there. Yeah. It's us in library company, the only ones with views.
That's true. Perks of city living in old buildings. Are there any questions that a student or somebody should avoid during an informational interview?
That they shouldn't ask? Or that, yeah. Well, for me specifically, it's how do I get your job, or how should I go about getting a job? Because I've had an incredible amount of luck. It's just for me I cold called the APS. It starts with A. I went to Drexel's directory of libraries in Philadelphia, and it was literally the first one listed. And I emailed the librarian, who was at the time like the director of the library, and I said, hi, I'm a library student and I'm fluent in this language and I've studied it. My language skills really got me the job, because I'm not originally from the United States, so I have a lot of fluency in other language, and I studied Latin and Hebrew for many years, and so anything that can set you apart from the crowd always gets you through that door. But I'm not good at answering that question because it's so, it's so specific to each person, you know? I don't know if it's like that for all jobs, but I can't answer that question of how you get my job, how somebody else goes about doing this.
Mm-hmm. Right, because there's something to that where timing is such a factor, skills that you bring in are such a factor, and like personalities are such factors that a question like that isn't so helpful. But like maybe rephrasing that as like, how did you get your job, is a bit
Right.
better, because then that tells you a bit more of that history without saying like, okay, I need a job, how do I get that? Where like that's not a very helpful question.
And it just so happened that right around the time that I wrote that email, they had gotten that large Darwin
Mhm.
collection that had all those different books in all those Romance languages. And then I called up saying, hi, I'm looking for a job and I have language skills. I mean, it was just that stupid.
Or fortuitous, right?
Right, yes.
So also with these things, and say I'm a student reaching out to you for an informational interview, do you have any sort of pet peeves on the cold ask or an ask for an informational interview?
I really don't. I haven't run across it. I know that like some people really hate emojis, or they want you to use specific. I have a really weird name. I'm used to people calling me all sorts of variations of my name. I don't mind. I don't know. I guess I hate it when I ask a question in an email, like a follow-up email saying, okay, yes, I would like to have an interview with you. What days work for you? I have meetings from 1 to 5 every Wednesday. That's the only time I can't make it. And then the person says, I'd love to have afternoon tea with you on Wednesday afternoon. It's like, you didn't read my email.
Mm-hmm.
Now I have to write you another one. Please just tell me when you're available and get back to me. I hate like saying yes and then waiting around for some response. It never happens that way. I'm a punctuality kind of person.
Yeah, and I think the courtesy in that is realizing that it's more so you doing somebody a favor than it is anything else too. And like you're putting in the investment, so the investment needs to be repaid in that way. It's a massive kind of part of that. Yeah. Okay, final 2 questions. Here we go. How do you see your field changing in the next 10 years?
I mean, it wasn't going great before COVID. Oh boy, again, it really depends on what kind of institution we're talking about. When we're talking about the APS, I really want to put it out there to internet land that for anybody thinking about this career, they should really look at how the institution reacted to COVID. The powers that be at APS were really amazing, and they have not made us have any undue fears about our jobs, which is great, because it's already super stressful. Other places are not that generous. Usually the first departments to get cut are conservation and cataloging, mostly because we're unseen and people at the top don't tend to know what we do, and it's confusing. And when it's done well, it's hidden. That's the biggest problem, is like when you do my job badly, then everybody knows about it because everything's going wrong, right? It's like, oh, this isn't the book I wanted. Oh, it must be because the cataloger's messed up. But then when everything's flowing really smoothly, nobody really sees the mechanisms behind all that. So that's a problem. A lot of mechanization of things that are doing a poor job. There's this huge push, as you know, to digitize everything. Digitize this, put this online, especially now, right? Mm-hmm. Everybody's doing virtual everything. But all of this work that we're producing, if there's no metadata behind it, if there's nothing sort of describing to the internet what it is, you might as well not have it on the internet. If you just throw a video up on a website with nothing saying like what it is, who's talking, what they're talking about, and maybe linking out to some other things that are related to it, it might as well not exist. So I hope it doesn't come to pass that in 10 years, there's only a handful of catalogers and all of a sudden libraries are like, oh, we used to have these people that did this detail-oriented work that were really good at it. We should find them again because we fired them all 10 years ago. I don't know. I want to have more hope than that. I have a lot of hope for the APS because there seems to be people in power that actually understand how important metadata is. So yeah, it's really institution dependent.
And I like that because though I don't want the series to focus on COVID, 10 years from now, that's still something that we'll feel the impact of. So it's important to also think about that and how you can look at organizations' responses to this environment. But also then within that last part is the hint that you might not, 10 years from now, somebody might not be looking for the title assistant head of cataloging, but instead the assistant head of metadata or research and discovery, like you mentioned earlier too. So I think that's really helpful to think about. The last question is something that we talked about briefly a while ago, but what's the one APS object that really demonstrates your work? And I have it pulled up. I'll share my screen so you can, folks can see it. Okay, there it is.
There it is.
On our digital library.
So beautiful. This is the skull map of Philadelphia. It's from 1777. It's from the Gentleman's Magazine. There's a lot to love about maps. And this one in particular, can I control this? No, you can't. So if you go south, if you go to South Philly, which was not yet incorporated in 1777, you see clearly marked Passyunk. And if you go to the Schuylkill River, you see Rambo. Rambo is actually an old Swedish name, and there was in Passyunk, Rambo on Passyunk, which I think is just it's just a super, super delightful aspect of this city. And I actually asked, the manuscripts librarian, Charlie, if I could have the right to get this printed on linoleum for my kids' basement playroom a bunch of years ago. We ended up not doing it because it was too complicated. But I chose this item also because I really like Philly. I'm from another country that currently is reopening with no new cases of COVID and has tracing and has testing and has a working economy. And universal healthcare. But I choose to live here. And I choose to live here because I actually really love Philadelphia and I love the people that I'm surrounded by. And I think when you think about what you're going to do in your life, I think it's not enough to think about what you're going to do, but you also have to think about where you're going to be and who you're going to surround yourself with. Because I know several people that really don't like Philadelphia and they like their jobs, but there's a tension there and it's not fun. I feel bad for them.
I love and appreciate that because I think throughout all of this, a really great common thread has been, it should be, and if you are in the position to look at it, and I hope everybody is, to look at career second and life first. And that life part has to come before the career because you have to agree with everything else outside of that. Career is ideally only a 40-hour-a-week thing, sometimes 50, sometimes 60, but the rest of that time is dedicated to your life, and being able to focus on that is a really massive, important part of all of
and when
this.
you have fun at work, you have to have something to have fun with outside of work.
Yeah.
You know, you have to have other interests.
Yep, and other people to explain what we do too. You know, it's it's a huge part.
Go out into the world and tell them about metadata.
That's perfect. Speaking of going out into the world, those were all the questions that we had. I think we covered everything in a fantastic way. Thank you so much, Estelle, for being on the first Career Chats with us today. It was so great learning about being an assistant head of cataloging and all of the other parts that go into it from your high school life to today. So thank you. And if this is your first time, second time, hopefully in the future, remember to check out our Career Chats website for more information on who is up next and how to submit a question. Thanks for me, the APS, and Estelle, and thanks for joining.